Welcome to the show, Spaceman.
Welcome to the Manspace podcast. We're your hosts, Doctors Matt Brown and Rob Porter, and clinical therapist Mike Porter.
Do you guys feel this weird pressure to have it be different every time? Or is that just me?
I think I feel a pressure like that. The last episode I actually really liked listening to. It was just like, we just kind of threw it in there in the middle of it. We were talking, it was like, welcome Spaceman, by the way, and just kept talking. It was good.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't remember how that went.
Well,
I remember your
some of
song,
us-
which still doesn't make
everyone
sense to
always
me,
does.
dude. I want to know how to do one.
You just do it, man. You'd know it if you were doing it.
Guess so.
Apparently Matt's bragging. He's like, I'm just not lonely enough to be one.
People
don't know how
always
to
want to
do
be
it.
around me.
Everyone's like, Matt, can we spend time with you? I'm like, fine. I'm like,
No, it's not. It's not that I know what one. I know what one means. But why do? Why do a one? You know what I mean? Like, why isn't it B?
But really, why don't a one?
True, but what's the opposite of B?
But even, isn't that a
Not
weird
be.
line too? One is the loneliest
be.
number that you'll ever be.
One
makes-
is the loneliest configuration relationally that you'll ever experience.
I think those were the
Somehow.
original lyrics. And his producer was like, dude, that's not going to fit. He's like, no, watch, hold on. One is the experience. And then hold on.
Man.
Dude, I love to imagine sometimes like what the recording process is like for people. Like I always wonder.
Like a recording music?
Yeah, like what's the
Yeah.
like I picture in my head certain artists in particular. Billy Ocean is one of those. And the other one is Rick Astley. Like I like to imagine that Rick Astley's in there singing. He's like, never going to give you up. And the guy's like, no, swallow more. Like, oh no, we're gonna give you up. I was like, yeah, that's it. You know? Or like if,
Swallow it. Don't enunciate so much.
if Billy Ocean's like, get out of my dreams, and someone's like, no, put something creepy in there. It's like, get in the backseat, baby. He's like, there it is. They're seriously like, how some producer wasn't like, this is going to be weird.
Put something creepy in there.
Yeah, like I want to know what the thought process was that got to this point where it's like, that's going to be gold. And they were right.
It works.
Hey, would you, if you guys were given the opportunity, if you were Michael Bolton and you were in a heavy metal band and they approached you, because that's what his history is, and they said, we like
Shut
your
up,
voice. We
really?
want you to, yeah, he was in a metal band. And they approached him and said, we want you to do like your voice. We want you to do these like love ballads. Would you do it? I've always said, like when I was in a band, we used to talk about this. Would you sell it? I was like, without question. If I had one song that made me millions, and then everyone's like, "You sold out," I'd be like, "Absolutely, I sold out. I'm in this to make money. I'm out
Why
now.
do they
and then I
say
can do
sold
whatever
out
I
and
want."
not cashed in?
Because you sold out on your principles.
But you
Yeah,
cashed
but
in on the cash. What if that's your principle?
So, Mike, take us there. Go.
Yeah. To paint a cleaner picture about what I'm trying to get to, when I was earning my certificate to become a teacher, one of the classes that I had to take was, did you just air quote me?
My
Teacher?
certificate to
Oh,
be a
are-
teacher.
Are you suggesting I did not earn a certificate?
I mean,
Or that somehow the teacher's qualifications are less than stellar? As a friend of ours says, those who can't do teach. That was a
It's
rough
always-
one for Jenner.
yeah.
She heard that and she just thought, you do know what my husband does, right? Clearly, I know this lady. She would not have said that if she had remembered in that moment that I was a teacher, because she's far too polite. But the teacher, her son had done a mission for their church where he had learned sign language.
Okay.
And spent 2 years kind of really getting into the deaf culture. And so she brought in, actually, Rob, do you remember them, the family from Washington?
Yeah.
What was their name? I don't
You
remember.
know, I don't remember. I remember their
Yeah.
interpreter got mad at me because I had a doorstop and it was a rubber doorstop and I was playing with it. And she's like, you need to be respectful of that. And I said, it's a doorstop. And she's like, it's church property. I said, I'll go shove it under a door. But I used to give the two deaf kids a ride to school every day.
Yeah, a really nice family. And I remember trying to communicate with because it was a brother and a sister, right?
Yeah.
And he had a brother that was my age, and he and I were friends. But the deaf brother would always sit and he would always try to communicate with me. And he was super patient because I didn't know sign language for anything, right? and he was just super polite and would try to interact and connect. And in hindsight, I think, I had a lot of missed opportunities there, but that's a whole other thing. Anyway, so she brings in that kid to this class because apparently that kid and her son had served their mission together. And she started talking about the deaf culture, which is like, I had no idea, right? To me, I thought, oh, you're deaf, right? Like I just kind of assumed that if you were deaf, you would have acceptance across, like, like, here's a group of deaf people, sweet. It is a far more complicated culture than that. And Matt, we were talking about this a little bit before, so you can help me remember some of the different subcultures. But there's like acquired deaf, born deaf. When they start to marry, there's like, you married a hearing person or you married a deaf person. There are those that have cochlear implants, those that have hearing aids, those that don't. And all of these people are viewed differently within the culture. And so in terms of like, for us, this family that we knew, their parents, like, I don't think I remembered that the brother and sister went to Juanita. They went to Juanita?
Yeah, I think so. I didn't drive them to any other school, so yeah.
Yeah, okay. But I remember they tried to have a class at church so that some of the kids their age could learn sign language to be able to communicate with their kids. Right. So they kind of tried to bridge this gap between the hearing world and the deaf world for their kids. I don't know. I wish now I could ask about, like, did they ever consider cochlear implants and things like that? Just because of the way it changes things. But the thing that, like, where I'm going with all of this is, what do you do when you're the parent of a child who is in one way or another very different from you, right? And I mean, personality, sure, like that's a very simple, basic way to kind of ease into this if you wanted to, but more pronounced, right? Like, I've had, over the years in teaching, I had a handful of autistic students, and I don't, like, none of them had autistic parents that I know, and all of them were various levels, like they fell in different places on the spectrum, right? Some of them were very high functioning, and others were not. But it was watching them, right? Like, watching how the parents would interact with it and try to cope with it and try to help their children cope with it. So what do you do when you have a child that's very different from you? And I'm curious first, like, where you guys have seen this personally. And Matt, like, we've actually talked about this personally for you on the show before. Mm-hmm. So I know you have some very personal experience with this. But maybe in your work with clients, where have you seen this kind of thing show up, and what kind of conflict do you see it create?
There's a lot of questions there, man.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. Just pick one and go for it.
Okay, I'll start. It's kind of interesting. This is like the episode we did where it's like, what do I do if I don't like my kid? Except I believe you're asking a bigger than that, but different than personality. And actually, I'm basing this partly on that TED Talk, Matt, that you sent, about, like, kind of like, my kid's actually in a different culture than I am.
Yeah.
And that culture, the whole thing feels foreign. And actually, what we do know from humans in general over the history of humankind is that we tend to do this, like, if your culture is foreign to me, it's often also threatening to me. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, you're kind of saying, what do you do if your kid is a threat to you in that respect? You're not saying it quite like that. But it is bigger than just, because maybe you like your kid, but they're, whether it's a different religious culture or sexual culture, or even if it's just like, I make fun of my kids all the time because they're into Dungeons and Dragons. Like, it only makes me laugh because I like to treat it I have nothing against Dungeons and Dragons. I've never actually tried it. I'm sure it's actually really fun. But growing up, it was like that's for nerds, and so now I like to talk to my kids like I'm some sort of super cool dude. It's like nerds, none of that nerd talk in my house. You guys can play that nerd stuff, but take it outside. I don't want that nerd stuff in my house. But if like this is a small example of that, I don't. I mean, there are plenty of bigger examples of taking the topic aside, like whether it's sexuality or gender, that sort of thing, of parents who have really leaned into wanting to show my kid I accept you and your culture. Um, the small example, I think I've mentioned this before a long time ago. My mother-in-law, my sister-in-law was into like some of the punk bands that I used to listen to in like the early 2000s. And I'm talking to my mother-in-law and I mentioned some band. She's like, "Oh yeah, I like them." I was like, "You like them?" And she said, "Yeah, Christina listens to them." So I got into them. I was like, "Oh." So she started to get into all these bands and I'm like, "You listen to one of them?" I was like, "Don't listen to that band. They suck." It was Good Charlotte. It's like, "Don't listen to Good Charlotte. They're stupid." But she got into them just because her daughter did. And she got into like My Chemical Romance because her daughter did. And so she's like, "Well, I want to stay in the vein that you're in. I want to understand like the world you live in. So I'm going to climb into that world. Like, I want to know what that is." So that's to me, one example of somebody saying, I will communicate to you. I'll say it this way, that I accept like where you are, who you are, or the things you're into by understanding them, at least in my mother-in-law's case, getting into them. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and it's funny. We'll actually get into a little in a little bit. I want to give Matt a chance, but this idea of so Andrew Solomon that's the guy that did the video Rob was talking about, and he did a book called, I think it's just called Far from the Tree, right?
Yeah. I'm just laughing because of the size of the book. If anybody goes
like
to buy it,
1,000 pages, just so you know.
Make it known it's 1,000 pages.
Yeah, it's like
it's huge.
A decade worth of interviews, basically.
Oh, wow.
With people that are, for one reason or another in different cultures, and just kind of their experience. And he gets into the idea of love versus acceptance.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really like
and
that.
Yeah, it's going to be an important thing to address.
Yeah,
I think in a minute, because like personally speaking, I know that like with one of my own kids, right? Like he really struggled with the idea that like to him, he equated our struggling with his decision as us not loving him. And that was a very different, like to us, we're like, no, we always love you. Like we're struggling to learn how to accept this decision, right, but we love you. And so we'll kind of climb into that in a minute. But Matt, like for you, what does this look like?
Sorry, I'm going to have like a brief pause. I'm going to call it like a sponsor break for a fitness tip for our spacemen real quick. Because Rob, I see that maybe your hamstring's still killing you.
No,
Okay.
Here's the thing. Since we're veering off for a second, I am. I don't know what my deal is. I feel like I'm not comfortable today, but it actually has nothing to do with my hamstring.
Okay.
I did go to a physical therapist.
Is it because you're alone in the office?
Hey.
Maybe on Monday, and I was like, first I go and I was like, all right, so give me some like stretches to do. And she did give me a bunch of stretches,
Mm-hmm.
and then she said, and then I'll see you 4 more times at least. And I was like, because it's like $300 a visit.
Yeah, and it's time out of
like,
your day, and yeah.
And then I started
that's why I
thinking,
stopped
luckily
going.
she can do it on like Friday afternoon. But since doing these stretches that are just like random things, I was like, oh, I had no idea. She kind of was saying like how often our hamstrings in general for most humans just get neglected because it's not like we use it for all the time for lots of stuff, but it's not usually something anybody works on because it's just the thing in the back there that connects to your butt and the tendon specifically. Anyway, it's fascinating, and doing these little stretches like these, this cracked me up. These what were they? The Romanian deadlifts. She called them Russian deadlifts. And she looks up, she's like, oh, sorry, Romanian deadlifts. That's the same thing. I said, oh, I mean, probably one was invaded by the other, but yeah. Anyway, so I'm fine. Hammy's
Okay.
doing great.
Good.
Thanks for checking in,
s-
buddy.
No, I'll say this. Spaceman challenge to you. Squat all the way down. Like knees have to be, more than just 90 degrees,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and keep your feet flat.
Oh yeah, right, dude.
No, okay.
I already know I
So
can't
check
do
it out. You know how tight I am and how neglectful I am of all
Yeah.
the muscles you said and more.
Yeah.
It only took me 3 days because I had to hold on to stuff at first, but it is magical.
Oh
It-
yeah.
Like it, I mean, I'm not saying it's the only thing that I will need to
Dude.
do, but it made a big difference in my ankle tightness and hips and then back, and it was
Yeah.
crazy.
These like
Trying
just
it.
these few stretches she has me doing, it's like
Mhm.
after like one night I was like, oh, this feels a lot better.
Yeah.
It's funny how much I had another client who's very physically fit, and he's like, dude, he's like, if you want to live like and not be miserable when you're like 80, just start stretching now. I
Yeah.
was like, oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, there's something to yoga.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
although
Strength and stretching. Yeah.
Yes, I was going to say that she was clarifying that like yoga's good, it's its own thing though. This is I just need you to do these stretches. It's like, oh, okay, cool.
Well, right, but
I
meaning
can't
yoga
charge $300
anyway.
for yoga.
That's
But I can
I'm sure
charge
she
300 for
probably
these
could.
stretches.
Anyway, continue, Matt. Now give us
So-
your thoughts.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I don't know if it is avoidable to have or to not have, I guess, like a fear for watching your kids go through difficult things or things you don't understand. And so when I've worked with parents, when I've thought about my own parenting, man, so much of it is like trying to prevent our kids from doing something that, yes, we think will not be good for them, but also in large part is going to be painful for us to experience. And so much of what we do comes from this place of like,
Yeah.
having our best guess at, what's going to make you happy and me not have to worry as a parent. And so when things are, I think that's just parenting in general. But then when you have kids that are going through something very different than what you've experienced, or making decisions that are very different than what you would choose for them, I think all of that comes alive in a really intense way for parents. So I think it's important to acknowledge first that, without trying, you probably already kind of have a vision in your head of what your child's life will or should look like. And sometimes you don't even realize it's there until they do something that conflicts with it. And then you're like, whoa, hold on, and you find yourself reacting. So just being able to give yourself some grace in that area, that as a parent, you're terrified for your kid to experience suffering, but also that's the very thing they need at least a decent measure of to be able to find their own way and all of these things. Right. So that gets in the way of love, that gets in the way of learning, about their experience and being curious. And I think that's a really important first step, is to address your own fears as a parent. What if my child is different than me? What if they make choices I don't agree with? What if they have to experience things that I don't understand and I can't do anything about? But
Well, and I think there's benefit in acknowledging that, depending on the age of the kid, right? And their capabilities, but of kind of acknowledging that fear with the kid. Like Jen and I have, as we've started to recognize just kind of the way our fear impacts decision making. Like we've started talking to our kids about like, look, sometimes the decisions we make are based out of fear. We try not to do it because it's not a good way to decision make. But these things scare us because we don't know what they are. And I think that's part of it, right? As you're watching your kid go through this thing, and not only do they not know what the experience is, you don't either. And so you can't even prepare to be able to help them when the conflict comes. You're waiting for it and just like, okay, like it's going to come because this is life and it's going to happen. And I don't know how to be ready for it when it comes. And that's a terrifying thought. Sorry to go ahead, Matt.
No, that's right. And that's perfect. I think that, being able to talk to them about it, because it's always there. and fear causes us to do some of the dumbest things in relationships and in life. And I think sometimes it's like situations like this completely yank you out of the role you think you're supposed to be in with your kid, which is walking ahead of them and identifying threats and kind of clearing a path. But what you're saying is like, what if I just stand right next to you and say, hey, what do you think? I'm kind of freaked out, right? I mean, here's what I do know because I'm older than you, right? Here's what I don't know. And how kids always say like, when you try and tell your kids like, I've been your age, right? You said it a ways back, Mike, where it was like, no, you don't know, because you don't know what it's like to be my age now in this world with the things I'm facing, right? You know what it's like to be this old when you were, so some things we do know, but some of the things our kids know better than us. And then there are things that they think they know that they don't, right? So it's like, I think walking side by side in these conversations, especially, it's for me personally, it's been like, when they were younger, I've got to make sure that we find out about this and link them up, to this community. And Lisa and I, trying to figure stuff out and kind of helping them to like, connect with people in their community and just letting them kind of like come to their own realizations about how they were different. But this last summer was kind of when it finally took off, at least for my middle daughter. And I was like, oh, well, we'll see ya. Right. Like I wasn't at this conference, but my wife's like, I'm just going to go back to the hotel room, and I'm super happy. Right.
Yeah.
Because you're just taken off, and like, I will never be able to understand you the way that these people are. Mm-hmm. And there are adults filling in the gaps for me that are telling you, hey, this is what it's like when you're going to be my age. Right. And I can't tell you that. I don't know.
That's awesome, dude.
Yeah.
And I do think, like, as I was thinking about this, right, like in terms of if I were sitting and talking to a parent who was struggling with this kind of thing, everyone always wants the practical, what should I do? And so I was thinking about it. And one of the things that I do, like typically when I see this in my office, it tends to be a parent dealing with severe mental health, right? And they don't understand it because...
Like dealing with it in their kid.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they don't understand it because they didn't deal with depression the way their kid does, or they didn't deal with anxiety the way their kid does. So they don't know how to relate to it. And they certainly don't understand what they're seeing, right? The number of times we've all heard, if they would just get off the couch, and it's like, you have no idea what you just asked your kid to do. Like, that seems so ridiculously difficult to them. And so I spend a lot of time just kind of helping parents understand what it feels like for their kid, right? Like, hey, this is what your kid is dealing with, right? And so that was my first thought. And it's kind of what you're describing is when you're faced with this thing, one of the best ways to take the fear away is to learn about it, become knowledgeable about it, understand what it is, and try and learn. Like, you're never going to be able to account for all of the different possibilities that are going to come up, but learn as much as you can. Find a community to become a part of for the support system alone, because there's going to be so many things that you can't prepare for. And like you found, Matt, like, I can't tell my girls what it's like to be an adult and deal with this because I don't know. And so now they have people. They're like, oh, okay. Like, you can tell me what this is going to be like because you're living it. And so go ahead.
That's that's a good thing. It's also tricky. I think it's hard to say to somebody else, I don't really know you. You take over for my kid in this arena. I don't mean to say fully, but to some degree, Matt and Lisa are saying, cool, somebody else who's been through this can talk to you about it, because I can talk to you about it, but I can't say, then I had to do this and then I had to do this. So and I'm not saying it's bad, but it's a scary thing to say to somebody else, you do it. I will trust you to try to help my kid in this way. Especially when there are times when it's like, why would I trust you? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting because it's, on the one hand, like you're saying, it's scary. And then on the other hand, I don't even really think your kids have to be that different from you for you to experience that same thing, maybe in different ways. Like, like think of maybe the extracurriculars that your kids get involved in. Sometimes they are things that you did, and other times it's like, I mean, something as simple as math. Like my daughter's in like pre-calculus now, and the highest level of math I had was predicated calculus, which doesn't use numbers. It's just logic. Dude, it was a little side note here. It was like the most freaking awesome math class I've ever taken. It was at the community college because I was doing that dual credit thing. Yeah. And the teacher just had like huge beard, wore a hoodie every day, and would take little wind-up animals out of his backpack to illustrate the logic problems. And without fail, halfway through the class, he'd write a problem on the board and go, think about this. I'm going to go smoke. Just walk outside and smoke a spice.
Seriously, it sounds like the first day class, the syllabus would be like, we all know the Pythagorean theorem states that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. What this class presupposes is maybe it doesn't.
Seriously, that's what it was. And he had this little wind-up bunny named Buffy that he always used. If Buffy, I'm like, okay. But she's asking me for help with her math, and I'm like, probably ask somebody else. Like, I think we all have those moments where it's like, I got to delegate this to somebody who's different than me, who knows more than me. But yeah, I think that it can be tough. And for a lot of people, it can be like an ego hit, right? Where it's like, oh man, like you don't need me for that anymore. And that can scare me, because what if our relationship was really just built on you needing something from me, and now I don't know what you need from me, right? How do I let you continue to progress and grow and still feel like we're connected? I think that simple, like not simple things, but fundamental things like that really get called into question for any parent, but probably amplified in situations like the one we're talking about.
Yeah. It's interesting because letting go of that, it's actually really impressive to me, Matt, that you and Lisa have done this. And I think part of it, right, like you guys have, I mean, at least as long as I've known you, you've talked about going to these conferences, right? And so I think, right, you guys have kind of, made yourselves part of the community. And so I think, yeah, maybe you even know some of these people that are, connecting with your kids.
Yeah.
I'd imagine.
And it is a small, I mean, their particular type of dwarfism is a really small community. So other parents that are dealing with, maybe something that is a much larger community and you don't feel like you're connected, and, or, your kid, like in a lot of situations, where maybe you have like a faith community or something like that, and your kid steps out of that. It's like, I don't know. Again, it's like I think there are certain situations where it's like, is this path you're taking going to be vastly different than the path we were on, or is it just kind of different? What are the differences? And I think if you don't have dialogue with your kid, it's hard to know, Yeah.
I do think too, what's interesting is in Matt's situation, there is no way he could deny and say, you're not really struggling with this. Right.
Yeah. Right.
Sometimes. But yeah, I mean,
well, yes,
like,
but I mean,
sometimes it's like, I'm tired. I'm like, well, there's a brownie down there. Oh, and it's like, okay, so you weren't really tired, were you?
Yeah,
we talk about that a lot. Yeah.
That's parenting type stuff too.
Yeah.
There's some subtle nuances with yours, maybe, but you couldn't look and say, no, you don't have dwarfism. Like, it's like, well, there it is, but when you get to the idea of like a faith community, or like I'm leaving this faith, or if
mental
you get into the sexuality realms or things like that, it's like, but are you really, or was that a choice? Or are you just being obnoxious? And it's harder in its own ways, different ways than what we're talking about, that to say, okay, I'll accept this because it feels like this is something I can change. With what we're talking about with match thing, it's like that one, there's at least elements of that is like, I know I can't change that part. So that's and I'm not saying, I'm not trying to compare one to the other. I'm saying there's some subtle nuances.
It's a really good point, because I think that, I heard that a lot with parents of kids with autism, right?
Yeah.
It's like, you don't see my kids struggle when you look at them, right? And then when they behave this way, you're like, whoa, get your kid under control, right? And it's like, you have no idea what's going on, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because I think the autistic community is one that at least again, in my experience, right? as a teacher, I ran into it frequently, where the parents will push against the idea that their kid might be autistic. And so they will avoid getting the kid help because they desperately don't want their kid to be autistic.
Right.
And so their kid struggles for far longer than they need to. And I mean, you look, the best time to get help for autism, and I suspect any of these things, is when they're young. Not necessarily as a way to like, well, but if we get them young, maybe we can. No, you can't. You're not going to stop it.
Mm-hmm.
You're just going to give your kid the tools to function in the world, and you're going to develop the tools to function in the world. And sometimes it can be difficult as a parent, and like, I don't know, Matt, if you've ever experienced this, of over functioning for your kid.
Oh yeah. And I think again,
instead of letting them struggle through it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, like we've talked about before, that I think that's also like a wider, common current trend in parenting anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where are we over functioning for our kids and robbing them of growth experiences? And, but again, is it done in the name of helping your kid, right? But maybe more about so that I don't have to feel really uncomfortable watching them struggle.
Yeah.
I can't remember who I was talking to about this a couple days ago or a week ago. Dang. I think we were talking about like kids at lunch, right? And like, sitting there struggling and, having nobody to talk to and things like that, right? Like, I don't know about you guys, but if I sit and think about that too long, like I want to throw up.
Yeah.
But like thinking about how, like what that's doing, is it's exposing your kid to really important emotions that they'll have to manage through. And hopefully, they'll be able to make a friend, or, someone will reach out to them, or maybe they, like we talked about last week, maybe they will be the ones that reach out.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there's so many ways you can overfunction. It actually, now that you bring it up, just happened this morning. Lisa normally takes Nicole to school, but I took her today, and she uses like a rolling backpack. And so when I've taken her before, like last year, I would put it in my trunk, and then when we'd pull up to the school, I'd hop out and get it out of the trunk. And I was going to put it in there when we were leaving. She's like, no, put it in the back seat. She's like, it's easier for me to get it out. And I was like, well, you don't need to get it out because I always get it out. She's like, it's better if you put it in the back seat. And we like, I'm sitting there like, no, like I do this, right? But and even as we're driving up, I'm like, you sure you're gonna be able to get that out? Like, but then there are other times where I feel like I've been the opposite with things. Like, no, you can do this and you need to. And she's been more on the requesting side. But no, it's hard, man. I think that's a good question for any parent. Like, where am I over functioning? Because I don't understand, or I'm too worried.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's there's like two parts in this to me that have to happen in order to kind of accept, if we move into that idea of you can love, like a love and acceptance are two different things, though they can be interrelated. But in order to accept where my kid is and where my kid may be going, it implies a lot of trust in my kid. Like in some ways, Matt's trusting his kid. That's like, hey, I'll let you figure this out. I know that I've showed you these things, which is the second part of trust. It's you're trusting that I have put things in you already. Like I've taught you certain things. Therefore, even if it's just having a conversation with your kid about where they are with certain things, and it's saying, all right, well, I'll trust you that as you talk with me and kind of try, or another adult, that you trust or whatever it is, that this will kind of, you know enough now to figure out how to move forward in a way that is best for you and that will get you the things you want in the long run. So I think there's a certain degree of managing our own anxiety in saying to our kid, not only like, will you be okay going through these emotions, but I trust you that you can go through these. partly because me and my wife or whatever, we've tried to model this for you the whole time. And so now we have to let you try it. And I think it's not an easy thing to do, to say to your kid, well, go do this. I think you'll come to a decision that will be good for you. And if you don't, hopefully you'll come back and talk with me and say, I'm struggling with this decision. Why am I struggling? So I think that's a big part of this, is figuring out, how do I trust and build it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's interesting. One of the things that I think Matt hit on earlier, and that came up in this,
Matt's always hitting on things.
Right, in this video,
That could be taken multiple ways.
was the idea of right, recognizing your own fear, recognizing that some of what is driving you is not just that you recognize your kid is choosing a harder life, right? When it's their choice, when it's not that your kid is going to live a harder life, but it's also recognizing that scares me. Like, yes, I'm scared for my kid, but I'm also scared for me, because what if I can't handle it? What if I can't be a good enough parent to my kid? What if I can't give them what they need when life is difficult for them? And recognizing and acknowledging, yeah, that scares me as much, sometimes probably even more, that I'm going to be a failure when my kid needs me most,
Mm-hmm.
that I'm going to come up short. And so it'd be better if I just protect my kid from it altogether, instead of letting your kid struggle through it. Because if we can start to recognize it and recognize again, then it becomes an issue of managing our own anxiety and learning how to deal with that, as opposed to always putting the blame on whatever the thing our kid is dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
Which, like, I had a parent when I was teaching years ago, and her kid he was autistic, very high functioning, and really severe ADHD, like really bad. And this parent blamed everything on the autism, because
Like
people
everything
have tolerance. And this kid was constantly in trouble.
Okay.
And it was always just, well, that's a function of his autism. And having grown up with a brother who has severe ADHD, and having often been the target of his ADHD, a lot of the behaviors I would see this, like I would watch this kid engage in, I thought, no, that's not autism, that's ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that thing your kid is doing, no, that's an impulsive thing. Now, maybe the autism is making it harder for him to manage the ADHD. I don't know, but like, I'm watching and I thought, oh, I know what that feels like, because I lived it. And so it was, but recognizing it was easy for her to just say, no, it's the autism, it's the autism, it's the autism. It became her escape for everything. And I thought, yeah, but just let your kids struggle through it. Like, it, open yourself to the possibility that, what if it's not the autism? What if it's the ADHD? Okay, we're going to have to interact with that differently, because they're not the same thing, and you don't handle them the same way. So it's to me, I think, an interesting, like, just kind of being aware of your own fears and insecurities and protectiveness as you figure out how to interact with your child.
Yeah, I think there's, like, this plays out along those same lines culturally sometimes too, where like culturally or religiously, parents may have a belief that my child is dealing with this or has this condition because of something bad I did, or this is a punishment to me or something, which can make it, can cause you to deal with it in very specific ways. Or sometimes, like, when your kid is struggling with something, and it's like, either whose fault was this, in terms of how they parented, or whose genes are responsible, or, like, you get a lot of parents that are really hesitant to maybe even have kind of testing done just to see what's going on, because they're like, well, if it's your genes, I'm scared I'm gonna hate you or something, like there's a lot that can go on for parents around that fear. And I think that that's probably a bigger thing to generally with parenting, to kind of take out of the equation as much as you can. And over time, like, if I'm thinking that, my kid is dealing with this because of some fault or shortcoming on my end, then I'm going to be working from a place of trying to resolve that through my parenting. And that's going to be even more damaging for my kid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's helpful to like consider the opposite of that and say, basically, like, let's say you were a horrible parent and your kids turned out amazing. Like, would you take credit for that? You know?
Yes.
And most people would
because I
say
was a
like,
horrible
no, right? So why are you taking responsibility, for things that, obviously I think it's helpful to think about your parenting, but like we said several episodes ago, like your kid is a person, right? And they are dealing with their own things. And, to a large extent, they have their own genetic makeup and they are making their own choices, and getting to that place of kind of not like just accepting that like I'm not responsible for or causing so much, but like let me take a step back and just really be able to appreciate what is going on for my kid. And when you said like, what do I do when I can't take it away from them? We've said this before, but yeah, I think like the best thing we can give our kids is us, like Rob, you've said before, like I want my kids to have me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like not a stressed out, task oriented, dad that
Dad.
just shows up to tell them what to do. Like I want them to have the whole picture. And I think in situations like where we don't know what to do, like there's nothing more comforting than just having somebody you have a close relationship with there with you in it, right?
Yeah.
Like one thing that is we always know to anticipate, and our girls hate it too, is like coming out of surgery and just being in that like anesthetic fog basically. And so we just know the only thing we can do is lay in the bed with you, right? And I know you're gonna cry and not know what's going on, and but I'm here, and that's it. Can't make it go away. I can just be right next to you. And I think I suck at that generally. Like when my kids are like, hey, this is really frustrating. And I'm like, well, it wouldn't be so frustrating if you wouldn't, but it's like we just automatically jump to, instead of just like, man, that sucks, and just being with people, I think is really important, especially when there's big differences.
Well, I was kind of gearing up for this, and I read an article about parenting stress in families with children with disabilities. And it was kind of looking at like what were the most common causes of the parental stress. And they assumed it would be some of the standard ones, finances, things like that. What they found is that like the two bigger ones were not actually the severity of the child's disability or that the child had the disability. It was more the way that impacted the relationship between the parent and child, and their ability to function socially was a much more significant indicator of parental stress than like their ability to physically function, right? Like if they were low able to, like not very able to physically function, but could function well socially, less stress.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that kind of comes back to this thing that we've been talking about. Like it really, which we say all the time, comes back to that relationship, right? That relationship that you develop with your kids is the thing that you're going to fall back on when you don't know. I don't know what to do, but I know that I'm going to be right here. And when it goes bad, then we'll figure it out together, because that's what we do, right? You with your kids, I think, yeah, it's, look, we know some things, we don't know others, so we'll just be here for you. And we'll go through this and we'll kind of ride it out together. Which I imagine for them is a very comforting thought, right? Like, and especially as they get older, I would imagine they know, right? Like, great, I'm going to come out and I'm like, I hate that part. I hate that part where I come out and I have to deal with this, but it's cool because I know mom and dad will be there. Right. Just that kind of, that knowledge that, yeah, this is going to be okay.
Yeah. Can you guys hear that?
Yeah,
I was
there's
gonna
Laura
say-
out there.
Dude, he is He is blowing up something right outside my window. There must be like a leaf that's just plastered to the
It's just going to get
concrete
that
or
one
something.
leaf. Well, I was going to say, I think that's a pretty good closing note anyway on that.
Well, there you go then.
Guess he was our alarm.
I do
Time's
I
up.
do have to put in I have to put in a plug
Drink time.
to remind spacemen to go and go to our website, the-manspace.com, to sign up and pledge your loyalty to the Manspace and get your certificate, a literal certificate that will be emailed to you as a social change
ambassadorship.
ambassador. You will be hereby dubbed. Imagine the three of us with our sword dubbing you an ambassador. Ta-da!
Of the Manspace.
And you can put it on your wall, and
not
everyone will be like, "You're legit."
Not Shrek style where we accidentally chop your arm off because we swing
No.
too hard.
Not that. And then catch us next time on the Manspace. Okay, I knew it. That's all. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Please remember to
Rate
and
Review.
please, we desperately need it.